We're less than 30 minutes away now from the entry interface that Orion will be experiencing once it comes to the Earth's atmosphere. This, of course, is simulating what we would see on a return from deep space. Orion is the vehicle that we'll be sending to deep space. We, of course, retired the space shuttles just a few years ago in order to be able to spend our focus and energy on deep space and sending humans farther than we've ever gone before. But, of course, we weren't ready to give up all the research that we're getting done on the International Space Station. So to be able to do both at once, we made some new partnerships with the commercial sector. We're going to hear more about that now.
NASA's Orion spacecraft is designed to send astronauts on exploration missions into deep space. Closer to Earth, orbiting about 250 miles up, NASA is using the International Space Station to conduct cutting-edge research and technology development and to increase our knowledge about what it takes to live and work for long periods of time in space. Currently, the 6 crew members of the space station travel to and from the orbiting laboratory in Russian Soyuz spacecraft. NASA's Commercial Crew Program is spearheading the development of a U.S. commercial crew space transportation capability that provides safe, reliable, and cost-effective access to and from the International Space Station in low Earth orbit. In September, NASA selected 2 commercial providers, Boeing and SpaceX, to develop the systems to transport astronauts from U.S. soil to and from the space station using the company's Boeing CST-100 and SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft. These new American spacecraft will also allow us to add a 7th crew member to the space station and double the amount of time the crew has to conduct research aboard the unique microgravity laboratory. Certifying and using U.S. commercial company spacecraft to provide transportation services to low Earth orbit allows NASA to expand its focus to even more ambitious missions, sending astronauts to explore an asteroid, learning in the proving ground of space around the moon. Ultimately, NASA's Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft and the skills and techniques learned in lunar orbit will enable humans to explore Mars. We are going to different exploration destinations, so we need different systems. NASA will own and operate its Orion spacecraft and Space Launch System for deep space missions, and will purchase services from Boeing and SpaceX to get astronauts to and from the station. That's what America's space program should look like in the 21st century.
Obviously, lots going on to be excited about in spaceflight, but the upcoming event, of course, is Orion Splashdown, which is now just 35 minutes away. Since it's getting close, we're going to turn everything over to Rob Davies at Mission Control Houston to get us down through Splashdown. Rob?
And welcome back to the Orion Flight Control Room here at Mission Control in Houston, where the team of flight controllers under the direction of Mike Serafin, the lead flight director, on console as they have been since the wee hours this morning, and now are heading into the home stretch of this milestone mission for the United States. While you were at Hangar AE with Brandy Dean, Serafin polled his team of flight controllers here for an extension of the power-up of Orion once it is on the water in the Pacific Ocean. So that power-up extension to keep Orion powered up from a nominal time of 15 minutes after splashdown has been approved. So Orion will stay powered up now for an hour after its predicted splashdown just 33.5 minutes from now. And that will enable Lockheed Martin to gain some valuable data on the thermal effects after Orion is back on Earth, so that it will enhance the post-flight analysis of all of Orion's systems and how they fared during its flight of 4 hours and 23 minutes. Just a few moments ago, the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket and its attached service module that Orion had been attached to, it performed a final burn of that upper stage engine, a disposal burn, if you will, to place at a safe distance away from Orion, and it will plummet into the ocean to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, its job having been well completed throughout the day today. So the next major milestone we're looking at is just 7 minutes from now. That will be about a 10-second firing of the thrusters on Orion in what is called the crew module raise burn. It's essentially a burn to test the thrusters and to slightly orient the spacecraft into the proper attitude or orientation for its entry into the Earth's atmosphere, which is scheduled just 22 minutes from now. Orion flying free is over the Pacific Ocean, currently at an altitude of 1,643 statute miles, having reached its peak altitude at 9:11 a.m. Central Time this morning. Its peak altitude reached at 3,604 miles, the statute miles above the Earth, the farthest any human-rated or human-occupied spacecraft has flown away from Earth since Apollo 17, 42 years ago in December of 1972. About 17 minutes after reaching peak altitude, the crew module separated from the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket and its accompanying service module. The guidance officer here in Mission Control reported that all of Orion's guidance systems were in excellent shape and that its thrusters were providing excellent control. Earlier, Flight Dynamics Officer Mark McDonald here in Mission Control took a look at the guidance data being received from onboard computers on Orion along with its GPS system and calculated a splashdown target point of 23.61 degrees north latitude, 116.46 degrees west longitude out in the Pacific Ocean. That's just 1.3 nautical miles or 1.5 statute miles east of the pre-flight target that had been calculated for Orion's return to Earth. That's almost a dead-on bullseye splashdown that is predicted for Orion. It will be pulling about 8.2 Gs at the peak of its velocity back to Earth, which will reach about 20,000 miles an hour at the time of entry interface when it's about 400,000 feet above the Earth's atmosphere, heading for its high-speed reentry back towards Earth, and a splashdown just 30 minutes from now at 10:28 a.m. Central Time, 8:28 a.m. Pacific Time. The splashdown target is 275 miles west of Baja California, 630 miles southwest of San Diego. The port of San Diego, where the naval base in San Diego is located, is the port of call for Orion once it is towed back under the auspices of the USS Anchorage, which is in the splashdown zone. The USS Anchorage, a San Antonio-class amphibious transport dock, is the second ship of the U.S. Navy ever to be named after Anchorage, Alaska. Its keel was laid down on September 24, 2007 at the Avondale Shipyard in New Orleans, and then owned by Northrop Grumman Ship Systems. That ship was launched back on February 12, 2011. It is also being assisted in the recovery operations today by the U.S. naval ship Salvor, a Safeguard-class rescue and salvage ship, the second U.S. Navy ship of that name. It launched on July 28, 1984, and was commissioned on June 14, 1986. Airborne in the splashdown zone is also the Icana unpiloted airborne vehicle that we are hoping will provide views of Orion under its three main parachutes as it descends towards its splashdown target. And there is a live view from the Icana right now as it is just awaiting the arrival of Orion, flying at an altitude of some 20,000 feet above the Earth over the Pacific Ocean. We're about two minutes away from the raise burn, as it is called, this brief firing of Orion's thrusters to fine-tune its orientation relative to the angle of attack that it will be arriving at once it enters the Earth's atmosphere just 18.5 minutes from now. Orion using its strings of thrusters, two redundant strings of thrusters, 6 thrusters to each string to provide the proper orientation for this so-called raise burn. Again, this raise burn is simply a test of the thruster system before Orion begins to plummet back into the Earth's atmosphere. A series of critical activities will be happening in rapid-fire succession once Orion reaches the Earth's atmosphere. The jettisoning of the forward bay cover, that is basically at the very top of the spacecraft, that will expose the variety of parachutes that we'll talk about once again in just a moment. Orion now has maneuvered into the correct orientation for its raise burn and for its ultimate angle of attack into the Earth's atmosphere. And the raise burn is in progress. Good control by the Guidance, Navigation, and Control Officer. And the raise burn is complete. We are now into the coast to entry segment of this flight. Orion currently targeting a splashdown point with the coordinates once again from the Flight Dynamics Officer of 23.61 degrees north latitude, 116.46 degrees west longitude. That should put its splashdown just about 1.5 miles, 1.5 statute miles east of the intended splashdown target that had been predicted and modeled for this brand new spacecraft pre-flight. The parachute system that will enable Orion to descend from a blistering speed of 20,000 miles an hour at entry interface to a gentle 20 miles an hour at splashdown just about 11 minutes later. The Orion again will be entering the atmosphere and will start heating up and slowing down due to the drag of the atmosphere. At about 24,000 feet, the forward bay cover parachute mortars will fire to pull the 3 chutes above the vehicle. About 1.5 seconds later, at 23,400 feet, that forward bay cover is jettisoning. It will be jettisoned, exposing the drogue, pilot, and main parachutes. 2 drogue mortars will fire about 2 seconds after the forward bay cover is jettisoned, and the drogue parachutes will unfurl, stabilizing the crew module. Some 56 seconds later, the drogue parachutes are released. 3 pilot mortars will fire at approximately 7,980 feet, releasing the 3 pilot parachutes, which in turn pull the main parachutes out. The pilot parachutes release from the main chutes, allowing the mains to unfurl. Both the drogue and the main chutes will reef at deployment, which is a gradual unfurling of those chutes, preventing a rapid deceleration and reducing the possibility of damaging the parachutes themselves. These main parachutes will reef by opening to about 3% of their full size for 8 seconds, then about 10% of their full size for another 8 seconds. Then they'll be fully opened until splashdown, at which time they'll be released from the crew module. The 3 main parachutes, as you've heard described in other discussions throughout the course of our broadcast today, are quite impressive. These 3 chutes, when fully deployed, stretch the length of a football field. They're each 116 feet in diameter, 220 feet in total length once deployed. We are 13 minutes away from entry interface. Orion transiting the Pacific Ocean, currently at an altitude of 887 miles, having reached its peak altitude not quite an hour ago of 3,604 statute miles above the Earth, having performed flawlessly in its first flight, exceeding expectations to this point, but now the critical milestones of entry must be met, and will be met in rapid-fire succession, as we said, with 22 minutes until splashdown. The guidance officer reports that we are tracking straight down the corridor for an on-target splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Inside 12 minutes now until entry interface, inside 18 minutes until forward bay covered jettisoning, and just 19 minutes away from the deployment of the main chutes that will enable Orion to gently splash down in the Pacific Ocean. You can see here on the forward screen here in Mission Control the flight dynamics tracking and the guidance tracking of Orion right down the pike for its intended splashdown point, just 275 miles west of Baja California, some 630 miles southwest of San Diego, to which Orion will be towed to the naval base in San Diego by the USS Anchorage once it is safely inside the well deck of that vessel. Nine and a half minutes until entry interface. Once again, with all of Orion's systems functioning to perfection during this first test flight for the vehicle, Flight Director Mike Serafin has extended the power-up phase of the post-splashdown time frame for Orion from 15 minutes to a full hour to enable Lockheed Martin to acquire invaluable data on the thermal effects that Orion will be experiencing shortly once it reaches the Earth's atmosphere. Entry interface, the first traces of the Earth's atmosphere coming up in just 8 minutes. Orion, which a short time ago, about an hour ago, was at a peak altitude of 3,604 statute miles above the Earth, now just 500 miles above the Earth. Range to splashdown, 3,036 miles. This view from the Icana unpiloted airborne vehicle that's in the splashdown zone is showing one of the P3 aircraft, part of the recovery force of boats, vessels, the USS Anchorage, the U.S. naval ship Salvor, and other airborne assets that are tracking the arrival of Orion for its splashdown in the Pacific Ocean just 16 and a half minutes from now. Again, this P3 aircraft will be tracking some of the peak heating data, recording peak heating data on Orion that will be analyzed post-flight by Lockheed Martin on behalf of the Orion program. Orion now 400 miles above the Earth, range to splashdown 2,600 miles. The recovery team in the Pacific reporting good navigational data from Orion as it goes right down the pike, heading for its splashdown target, 1.5 statute miles east of its pre-flight predicted target point in the Pacific Ocean. Now just 5 minutes until entry interface. At that point, Orion will be 400,000 feet above the Earth, traveling at almost 20,000 miles an hour. Launched from Complex 37 at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station 4 hours 10 minutes ago. Orion is now less than 14 minutes from its return to Earth, anticipating the succession of events that will begin 3.5 minutes from now at the point of entry interface, where Orion will reach a velocity of some 20,000 miles an hour, some 84% of the velocity that a spacecraft would encounter on a trip back from the moon. And now we're receiving live video from Orion, from inside the crew module and one of the flight test cameras. 3 minutes away from entry interface. Orion right on track, its guidance perfect. We may be experiencing a telemetry loss of signal during a brief blackout period after entry interface, when the plasma effects begin to build around the spacecraft. That may begin at an altitude of about 374,000 feet, may continue up until about 151,000 feet, but this is a variable, and we'll stand by to see if in fact we do lose any data during this brief blackout period, and if so, for how long. Everything quiet here in the flight control room. Flight controllers under the direction of Mike Serafin, the lead flight director, watching their data. Inside 2 minutes until entry interface. Orion now 132 miles above the Earth, range to splashdown 1,200 miles. 11 minutes until splashdown. Coming up on 1 minute until entry interface. Standing by for entry interface. Orion now at an altitude of 470,000 feet, 900 miles from its splashdown target. Guidance officer confirms that Orion has reached entry interface. The moment of truth for Orion for the next 9 minutes, 45 seconds. And as expected, we have reached a loss of telemetry as we enter this brief blackout period. At the time of the blackout, the flight dynamics officer reported that all of Orion's systems looked perfect. This is the point in time where Orion would be experiencing its peak heating of some 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit as it barrels through the Earth's atmosphere, traveling about 20,000 miles an hour, some 84% of the velocity of a spacecraft returning from the moon. We're 4 minutes away from the jettison of the forward bay cover at the very top of the spacecraft that will begin the chute deployment sequence. And we've reacquired signal from Orion, good data being processed. This view from the Icana unpiloted airborne vehicle over the Pacific Ocean, over the splashdown zone. Time to splashdown 7 minutes. Range to splashdown 127 miles. And now this view from Orion, its thrusters maintaining control. Flight Dynamics Officer reports that we're tracking right down the middle. G-force is building up on Orion, now almost to 3 Gs. A predicted G-force load of some 8 to 8.3 Gs expected. And the Global Positioning System satellites have a good lock on Orion as it heads toward its splashdown target. We're 2.5 minutes away from forward bay cover jettison, and this view again from the Icana aircraft over the splashdown zone. Orion at 125,000 feet. Healthy thruster system reported by the propulsion officer here in Mission Control. Passing through 80,000 feet. Range to splashdown about 5 miles. Passing through 60,000 feet. Orion has gone subsonic. Standing by for forward bay cover jettison. $35,000 feet. That view of Orion from the Icana. $25,000 feet. Time to splashdown less than 4 minutes. Forward bay cover has been deployed. Drogues have been deployed. Great video from the Icana. $15,000 feet until splashdown. Coming up on main chute deploy. From a waypoint over the Pacific Ocean, there is your new spacecraft, America. Drogues away. Main chute deploy. On mains, everything looking good. Good reefing reported. $4,000 feet. Three good main chutes reported from the USS Anchorage. That's confirmed here in Mission Control. From a high-speed rate of 20,000 miles an hour to a gentle return back to Earth more than 4 hours and 20 minutes after it took off on a Delta IV heavy rocket from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. $3,200 feet now until splashdown. $2,200 feet now. Winds at the surface just about 12 knots. Wave heights no more than about 4.5 feet or so. Perfect conditions for Orion's homecoming. This view from Orion itself of the chutes, helping it to descend gently towards its splashdown in the Pacific. 1,000 feet. Just a few hundred feet until splashdown. $100 feet. We have splashdown. Splashdown confirmed at 10:29 a.m. Central Time. Orion is back on Earth. America has driven a golden spike as it crosses a bridge into the future. And we now have confirmation that Orion is stable 1, upright. Orion splashdown at a mission elapsed time of 4 hours and 24 minutes. And the crew module uprighting system is now being activated. These are the 5 inflatable airbags at the top of the spacecraft to ensure that Orion remains in an upright position. And you can see it on the water. The flight dynamics officer now has provided a final splashdown target in the Pacific with a latitude of 23.6 degrees north latitude, 116.46 degrees west longitude, a bullseye splashdown for America's newest spacecraft. Splashdown occurring once again at 10:29 a.m. Central Time, 8:29 a.m. Pacific Time, at a point some 270 miles or so west of Baja, California, about 630 statute miles southwest of San Diego. This is Mission Control Houston. Here in the flight control room, procedures for post-splashdown activities and the monitoring of data. And there you can see in the mission director's room at Hangar AE at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, smiles, exuberance, celebration. Orion's maiden flight from start to finish was picture perfect. Significant milestones achieved for the Orion program as we move forward towards future steps that will ultimately take us to Mars. But this day belonged to the team all the way around: Lockheed Martin, United Launch Alliance, NASA, all of the contractors involved in the development and testing of Orion for what turned out to be the most perfect flight you could ever imagine, and a first flight of a vehicle that was being tested, a brand new vehicle launched on a Delta IV rocket, a splashdown right on target in the Pacific Ocean, a significant milestone for America's space program. That view from the Icana is one of the Zodiac craft moving toward the location where Orion is gently bobbing in the Pacific Ocean, upright in Stable 1, with all 5 of its inflatable airbags having inflated properly to maintain it at a 180-degree orientation upright. It splashed down Stable 1 and stayed in that configuration through the time that its airbag system was deployed. Every single system on this spacecraft functioned by the book from start to finish. to recap, Orion, following its launch, made 2 orbits of the Earth. The first elliptical, the second highly elliptical, boosted towards its point in the sky and into deep space by the upper stage of a Delta IV rocket that launched the vehicle from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and Launch Complex 37 at 6:05 a.m. Central Time, 7:05 a.m. Eastern Time. Orion passed through the Van Allen radiation belt twice, all of its systems functioning perfectly, no effects whatsoever on the shielding or the computers or the avionics of the craft, reaching a peak altitude at 9:11 a.m. Central of 3,604.2 statute miles. The crew module separated from the service module right on time at 9:28 a.m. Central Time, and then we moved towards the critical entry phase. Once again, this view, we're looking from one of the helicopters providing sequential still video of Orion in the water, perfectly upright, having splashdown upright, releasing its parachutes. The waves cooperating, the weather cooperating at the splashdown zone. Orion entered the high-speed part of its journey back to Earth with entry interface, reaching the first traces of Earth's atmosphere at 10:19 a.m. Central Time, moving at a speed of about 20,000 miles an hour. Moments later, entered a very brief blackout period, while the plasma effects of its descent into the Earth's atmosphere blocked telemetry from being received here in Mission Control. Once again, you're looking at a variety of vessels and aircraft moving towards Orion in the initial phase of the recovery process that will result in Orion being winched and pulled into the flooded well deck of the USS Anchorage for its trip back to the port of San Diego, Naval Base San Diego. We now received a report that 3 of the 5 crew module uprighting system airbags at the top of the spacecraft did inflate fully. One was partially inflated. A 5th bag was not clearly visible to the initial recovery team members, but irrespective of that, Orion landed in an upright position under its 3 main parachutes in Stable 1, as it is called. If you recall from the old Apollo days, Stable 2 would have meant upside down. It landed Stable 1, it splashed down in Stable 1, and maintained its upright position through the use of its airbag system at the very top of the spacecraft. Here in Mission Control in Houston, the work is not done as Flight Director Mike Seraphin and his team of flight controllers continue to watch over the initial recovery procedures being executed out in the Pacific Ocean, some 275 miles west of Baja and some 630 miles southwest of San Diego. Seraphin, about an hour or so ago, gave a green light after polling his team of flight controllers for the extended power-up of Orion in the water to provide Lockheed Martin a bonus opportunity to retrieve thermal data from the spacecraft from its high-speed reentry back to Earth, where temperatures around the vehicle rose to about 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So far, the report is that there are no hazardous conditions around the spacecraft, no leaks being detected. Small boats are making their way towards Orion for the initial phase of the recovery. The landing and recovery operations folks on the scene in the Pacific Ocean verifying with Flight Director Mike Seraphin here in Houston at Mission Control that there are no leans against approaching Orion for the initial phase of its recovery.